I certainly am. All right. Well, I've started recording, so I think we may as well make a start on our webinar this evening. Hello, everybody, and welcome to DEA's webinar, Healthy Planet, Healthy People. Oh, sorry, Healthy Oceans for Healthy People. That's a good start. My name is Kate Wiley. I'm a GP and the Executive Director of Doctors for the Environment Australia. I'd like to first acknowledge that the nation we call Australia is stolen land, and First Nations people have never ceded their sovereignty. And, I offer my respects to First Nations elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge ongoing connection to land, sea, and waters. I think it is a sign of respect to write the name of the land that you are on in the chat. I am in Tanzania on Ghana land, so Namani, which is hello to a group of people in Ghana. I also want to acknowledge the climate health emergency. We are in the danger zone for 6 of 9 planetary health boundaries due to our human-made actions, most notably our dependency on fossil fuels and our exploitation and disregard for nature. Including in those boundaries, of course, is climate change, but also biodiversity loss and freshwater use, which is quite pertinent when we're talking about ocean health. And I also want to acknowledge that the oceans are in trouble. And, I'm in South Australia, and we are currently suffering from this terrible algal bloom brought on by a marine heat wave. And we have awful fish death and loss of marine life on our beaches. And, it seems to be getting worse. I've just found out today that it's in the Kooyong, and that's, obviously very, very distressing. So I think it's really important that we start, acknowledging the need to look after our oceans' health. And of course, we are also inspired tonight by David Attenborough's Oceans movie. And I don't know if many people in this room have seen it, but if you want to react with your little react button at the bottom of the screen, if you have seen it, because it's pretty impressive as a film, and it really kind of brings home how our oceans are in major trouble because of the way we treat them, but also that it gives us hope that their resilience can be so important in saving us in the future. Love your crocodile there, Brooke. So, I'm joined tonight by 3 fabulous people who are going to share their expertise about oceans and their health with us. I'm going to just read out their bios quickly, and then we'll start getting into questions. We've got a couple of quick questions, a couple of long questions, and time for chats at the end. So first, welcome Arabella Douglas. Hello, Arabella. Arabella, how you going? Arabella is a Minyungbal woman of the Bundjalung Nation and a cultural custodian and strategist working at the intersection of Indigenous law, ecological justice, human rights, and environmental economics. Through her work with Currie Country Social Change, Arabella advances First Nations-led responses to climate change, water governance, and cultural sovereignty across the Bundjalung Country and the wider Pacific. Welcome, Arabella. Thank you very much for coming along. Our second guest is Adele Pedder. Hi, Adele. Adele is the Protected Areas Manager with the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Adele is a passionate advocate for marine conservation and has worked in the field for 20 years. Adele has a background in marine science, environmental management, and political science, and has extensive experience as a campaign manager throughout Australia, specialising in the top end. Welcome, Adele. How are you going?
Great, thanks, Kate.
Thank you. And lastly, but not leastly, is Dr. Brooke Arche, who is a GP specialist and the chair of DEA's Biodiversity Special Interest Group. She's a passionate nature lover and wildlife photographer who understands how important healthy oceans are for human health and well-being, and is a strong advocate for our planet's health. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you, Kate.
Nice to see you, Brooke. So my first question, and I'll go from Arabella to Adele to Brooke, please, is what's your earliest memory of the ocean? And perhaps, bring that into what do oceans mean to you?
Well, I am a saltwater woman, so that means I'm born with a totem that exists in the ocean. I am on the East Coast. So, for those that don't know the East Coast, one of the most significant stories here, besides the first sunrise story, because of course the continent sunlight breaks near Byron. So, there is a lot of association with creation that comes from our most eastern point of the continent. So I grew up at Fingal Head, which is right on the beach. Like, so my relationship with country is both proximity to oceans and lagoons and rivers. My totemic association is grounded in oceans and waterways. And I have another totem, which I got when I was about, I don't know, 20 something years ago, in my early 30s, which is so you have an inherited totem, and then my uncles gave me a further totem. So my totem association, both for male and female energy, both comes from the ocean. So I'm a saltwater woman. And if you meet other people and they are saltwater people, they're generally their first totem will come from the waters, which is a grounding way to sort of have an association with the ecosystem. Um, I had my first bleeding as a young child in water. So I come from that tradition. So that's ancient waters that connect women and birthing cycles and all of that. So my relationship with water is very intimate because it's about how you observe yourself and what your role is in life. So I have a stingray as my born totem. And that means I have an association and observation, which tells me that's how I fit into the world. So it's quite intimate and very personal. In terms of practice and ceremony, my husband and I got married in water. So we had a water ceremony to being married. So I continue those practices. We're now divorced, but still our waters are bonded. So those elements are a it's not an extended apparatus of performance. It's about understanding how your biological and ecological relationship works in terms of how you work and synthesize with the environment. So it's quite intimate.
That's amazing. Oh, thank you, Arabella. That's such a beautiful
common for a lot of people. I don't want to pretend that we're special. A lot of people have similar practices who are saltwater people.
Yeah, but it just shows what a deep and intrinsic part of your identity the ocean is. And Adele, what's your answer to that question? What's sort of your earliest memories of ocean and what do oceans mean to you?
Well, probably, honestly, it's a memory of being seasick in the ocean, but we'll put that aside because that's often what happens. But I think I was very fortunate that particularly my father, but my parents had a love for the ocean, particularly sailing, the tranquility and the quietness of being on the ocean in that peaceful environment. So, I mean, sometimes I realize that I was so young from such a young age of being on the ocean and being in the ocean and the motion of the ocean that I feel like it's almost part of my cells as I grew. Like sometimes I'll go on a boat and the rocking will soothe me to sleep because it's something that's so embedded in my being. But I was very fortunate to experience the oceans of Southern Australia, the wildness and the power of those oceans and the wildlife that lives there, as well as the Queensland oceans and the coral and most often the more calm environments. So I've been very fortunate to experience the range of things that it can throw up. I haven't been brave enough to go into the sub-Antarctic oceans. I'll leave that for other people. But I think I've always just, I guess, been connected to the ocean that way, and it just continues to draw me back and draw me into it. I don't think I could live farther than 10 minutes walk from the ocean for that reason. So I've chosen to live in Darwin. I love it up here, but you can actually afford to live within 10 minutes from the ocean. So any ocean lovers that need to be near the ocean, come up to the top end.
Darwin, come up there. Lots of advertising for Darwin from you, Adele. I feel like you've got to bring everybody up. And what about you, Brooke? What's your, early memory of ocean and what does it mean for you?
Well, I am very lucky because I grew up in Far North Queensland, which is adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef. And as a child, I certainly didn't appreciate how magnificent I was. But when I look back upon it now, I realize that I just had the most wonderful upbringing. And I live there again. I just moved back here to Cairns last year. So I am very lucky in that I had many trips out to the reef as a child on my grandparents' boat. So my earliest memories of the ocean involve, boat trips out to the reef and trips to Eddy Bay, which is a very special little beach south of Innisfail, where cassowaries just kind of walk around like it's completely normal. And since becoming an adult, I've certainly moved. I've lived all over Australia. I've lived in Queensland, obviously, and the Northern Territory, as I was telling Adele before. I've lived in Western Australia and I've lived in New South Wales. But every place I've chosen to move to, every single place has been by the ocean. No matter how remote I've wanted to live, it's always been by the ocean. And that's never been a coincidence. It's always been a very, very deliberate choice because the ocean to me is just a very, very special place, and it's where I feel the most at home, I suppose, and it's where I feel the most at peace.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Brooke. It sounds like for all three of you, it's just been this, it's a very intrinsic connection that you have. Personally, I grew up in the desert, so I'm from Broken Hill. And so my first time I saw an ocean, I was quite frightened. I do love the beach now, but I don't feel like I have that same thing. But I do feel that when I'm in desert country, I have a big connection up there. So starting with you, Arabella, if you could please expand a little bit more on the cultural significance of oceans from your First Nations perspective and what it means from a health perspective, like for social, psychological and physical health. I know that's a big question. It's not like a simple one, but it's just that.
Yeah, but I think it's a pretty easy question to answer because I think all the speakers spoke of connection, and so did you, about an environment and how it impacts you. So culturally, across all sea country, it strengthens people's identity psychologically around it and being within it. That's kind of the process of it. So, water is healing, water is ceremonial. There are aspects of your relationship to yourself and to other people that is evidenced and expressed through physical interaction with nature and physical interaction with water and bodies of water. So that, you have that in Christian concepts as well. People are still sipping, sips of blood, etc., and eating parts of body, as part of that service. All of the relationship around the ecosystems is both a spiritual well-being and a mental well-being tool. But that exists, and when, of course, we don't have a uniqueness to it. So Aboriginal connection is not a monopoly that only brown-skinned people feel. It's actually a human connection that people are open to having an ecological experience and an intimacy with nature that they actually are drawn to. So surfers are a good example. Every surfer will tell you that they use that for de-stressing and relaxing. Everyone who swims will say they do the same thing. You, as a doctor, would know that your body is actually physically changed by interacting with nature over a period of time, whether it's something, the magic hours, 36 hours. In nature, your body starts to heal and become different. That is a process where the medical science is really giving language or timing and destination to what is the relationship of Aboriginal experience. So when I was young, for example, if cousins and I grew up with a very large family, our cousins were fighting, we were told to go down to the beach and go for a swim, thinking that that was just a distraction, but it wasn't. It's the cucumber sandwich in our culture. The ocean is the cucumber sandwich, medicinal, and is supposed to calm you. And you learn and you start to rely on the relationship with nature to tame you and calm you and work with you. So in my most dire moments, I seek water still. And in terms of Aboriginal people's relationship to country, every Aboriginal person will tell you that they live on the best country wherever they are. So they can be WA, desert country, whatever. But all of that's true. It's all the same, but all true. You probably feel more alive in Broken Hill in that environment because it's not actually psychological. It's actually chemical. It's that your body has a familiarity with the environment and it's responding to that. It's a comforting element. That's well documented through science on how the environment impacts you. When you nurture those connections, which is very much an Aboriginal practice, so that's done without the full language of saying, go for a swim because your body will change and be calm. There's not that in the direction from a parent just telling you to get out of their yard from terrorizing you with arguing with your cousins. But it's instruction knowing that interrupting whatever you're feeling, being heated, argumentative with water, actually makes you more peaceful. So that learning is passed down from observation on how the relationship with the environment instructs how you might bring up a child. So we were also taught, for example, how to breathe, and I'd say this to kids all the time. Again, another tactic for kids is to take them to the ocean and you learn to breathe in tune with the sea, you know. And you do that because when kids are fussing and upset, or children are fussing and upset, it's a way to self-soothe. So the tactics of self-soothing in an Aboriginal context, and it takes you a lot of time and different types of language to actually be as appreciative of Aboriginal sciences that are innate. Like I learned to read weather by looking at the moon because I'm an East Coast girl. I learned time and distance from my environment. The only other people that share that in white society are normally sailors because they learn night navigation as a tool for safety. That's something that Black kids all up and down the coast learn when you're a saltwater kid. So you learn things about your environment, and it might be until you get to year 9 before you understand the science behind what you're learning and understand what night navigation would be. But it's quite a sophisticated way because white society has conceptualized different canons of information where Black society integrates different canons of information. So that is the physical and the mental and the medical benefit. Being a whole human being is understanding you as a concept and a connected element to the environment, and that's all part of your health. So many people love to go back on country for rest, renewal, to when they're going to give birth, even when they're passing. You'll see many stories of Aboriginal people saying, I'm about to pass, I need to go home. And what they're actually seeking is an innate nurturing that your chemical, your body, your cellular body is reacting to the environment that it's most familiar with. So it gives you an innate calm.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm not the doctor on the call, but I know the science. So, you know.
That's a beautiful response. Thank you, Arabella. And I sort of, while you're talking, I'm thinking about things like, you know, how time in nature is, you know, so important for, you know, my own psychological health, and how if I'm ever stuck on something, I go outside, and that allows my brain to clear, and that gives me new perspectives. And I suppose one of the concerns that we have with, you know, our climate change is that, you know, things are not what they used to be. And that's that whole concept of solastalgia and climate grief as we see our world changing around. And I think that's happening.
The other part, the inverse of that, of course, is that you suffer in the same way with the environment. And that
absolutely.
Also extremely difficult, although we have some, you know, tangible and intangible treaty arrangements that aren't adopted here in Australia yet, as a failure as well. But that connection is so strong that you actually mourn country. And absolutely. I don't know that people genuinely appreciate that the feeling of that.
I think we've got an ignorance there, or a lack in our knowledge, or something that's there's a problem there. I might turn to Del now, because when we think about ocean health, you know, obviously, you know, like from the, you know, the science sort of thing, what do you think of the health of our oceans at the moment? How do you think they're going? And really, what do you think about global warming and oceans and, deep sea trawling, which of course is very, very distressing for those of us who've seen the film.
Yeah, that's right. In the Attenborough film, there's shocking footage of deep sea trawling, which is really blowing a lot of people away because it's usually not seen. The oceans are out of sight, out of mind, offshore. So yes, it is shocking. But talking about David Attenborough and how it links to what Arabella was saying, David Attenborough is 99 years old. Like he's a shining example. Get amongst nature, be healthy, and live long. And he's amazing. He's just made a film. So, I mean, our oceans are under more pressure than ever before. The film touches on climate change, industrial fishing, and there's a bit there on plastic pollution, but the ocean is getting it from all angles. Up Brooks Way, the Great Barrier Reef, it's getting a lot of water pollution off the land from farming practices. Yeah, it's like the human body getting it from all angles, whichever way you look, there's something coming at you to impact the health of the marine environment. And I'm sure everyone in the room will have something that they've seen locally, whether it's marine plastic pollution washing up on the beaches, the impacts of marine heat waves in the south, the west coast saw marine heat waves. Recently, we have threatened species being impacted by commercial fishing, sometimes even recreational fishing. But the great thing is we actually have solutions to these problems. They've been trialed and they work. And the David Attenborough film talks about one of the key solutions that we have, which is protected areas. If you just protect an area and stop impacting it, no extractive activities, give it a chance to recover, and it will. So that's where marine parks and marine protected areas come into play. Those areas, of course, will still get impacted by climate change. Marine heat waves will still come through, etc. But I guess the analogy with the human body is a marine park will put, the human body in the best possible healthy position that it can be. So if a virus comes along, you can fight it off and recover as quick as you can. So that's what the marine park does. It ensures an area is in good health. If a warming event comes through and knocks it down, it's got the best chance to rebuild and recover. So that's an area that I work on with the Australian Marine Conservation Society is one of the key tools in the toolbox to help our oceans recover. And of course, we have parallel activities that we can do as well, reducing industrial fishing, reducing overfishing. We've got a seafood guide, a sustainable seafood guide called Good Fish Guide, which is for consumers. So if people want to eat seafood, whether buying it from the seafood monger or a restaurant, you can look up on an app particular seafood options and you can make a more sustainable choice as a consumer. There's a huge demand for that. So there's bits and pieces that we can all do, but Attenborough's film talks to those protected areas to try and help our oceans rebuild and recover.
And I think it's it's so beautifully demonstrated in the film, but also it shows that the oceans is to improve resilience, really. The oceans so long have been their carbon sinks, they absorb so much of the excess carbon that we're creating. And my concern is it feels like for a long time the oceans have been a buffer for global heating, and that now we're getting to a point where that buffer might be exhausted. And so what the marine protected areas can do is provide places where it can regenerate to create sort of resilience for oceans. And because of course oceans health, it really impacts on human health. And Brooke, I really want to hear from you about why is ocean health important to us? How does it mean, what does it mean for our physical, psychological, social health as well? And what do we see, as a doctor, how do you sort of respond to that?
So, I mean, there are so many ways in which human health and ocean health are linked, but I think I'm just going to focus on five, probably the top five that are, probably the biggest contributors. And the first is one that you literally just mentioned a moment ago, which is the fact that the oceans are vital regulators of the world's climate. So when phytoplankton die, some of the carbon that they absorb through photosynthesis sinks to the ocean depths, where it's sequestered from the atmosphere, and this process makes the ocean the world's largest carbon sink. And a little fun fact: oceans have absorbed approximately 40% of the carbon dioxide, all the carbon dioxide that humans have produced since the Industrial Revolution. And as we know, obviously, climate change is the biggest health threat, facing us. So that's a pretty significant way in which ocean health and human health is related. Another one is microplastics, and I think perhaps Adele maybe touched on that before as well. So about 10 million tons of microplastics end up in our oceans per year. And as another fun little fact, it's predicted that by 2050, there will be more plastic that plastic will outweigh fish in the sea, basically. And the research space about microplastics in human health is certainly an evolving one. It's in its relative infancy because it's a relatively recent phenomenon in the scheme of humanity. But what is really interesting is that there's not a single part of the body that has not been found to be untouched by microplastics. Microplastics have been found in human placentas, in testes, in the brain, in joints like the hip and the knee. And although, like I said, the research is still evolving, certainly microplastics have been linked to a variety of issues, which includes fertility problems, neurodegenerative diseases, autoimmune disorders, cancers. So it's a very interesting space that I'll certainly be keeping a close eye on in the next couple of years. But the third thing, and Arabella's kind of already talked about this quite a bit, I think, tonight, is the psychological aspect of oceans. So over the past couple of years, there's been increases in the language about green spaces and green prescriptions, which is really wonderful. It's now becoming more mainstream. But the concept of blue spaces, which includes oceans and rivers and lakes, is certainly it's in its infancy, but it's kind of getting there. And research has found that contact with blue spaces enhances psychological restoration. And there has been research that has found positive relationships between scuba diving and mental health, which is unsurprising to anyone in there listening right now who's a scuba diver. And scuba diving has also been found in other research to be associated with transformative experiences for people with physical impairments, and other research has found it's been contact with the ocean, so swimming and scuba diving has been found to be very beneficial to the mental health and well-being of cancer victims or cancer survivors. So the psychological aspect is huge, but the fourth huge one is food security. So more than 3 billion people in the world rely upon seafood, either farmed or wild caught, for a significant source of animal protein. And we know that so there was research that was done in the Philippines, for example, that found a relationship between seafood consumption in children and a decrease in stunted growth in childhood. So basically, aquatic foods have the potential to play a serious role in global food insecurity and malnutrition. And the fifth one that I would have to mention would be on medical discoveries. So there was recent research that found that oyster hemolymph, so hemolymph is like the blood equivalent of oysters, played a significant role in killing certain bacteria. So, I mean, that's huge. That's significant. That's a significant finding because we live in a time of increasing antimicrobial resistance, which might one day kill us all if climate change doesn't beforehand. So this is significant research. But the oceans have already contributed to medical discoveries. There's an analgesic called, and I might be mispronouncing it, ziconotide, but it's intrathecal, and it was first isolated from the venom of the marine cone snail. And there are already antiviral and anti-cancer compounds that are in use, that have been for many, many years, that were first isolated from the Caribbean reefs. So if to summarize, because I know my answer has been a little bit long-winded, I would say vital regulator of the world's climate. I would say microplastics, psychological health, global food insecurity or security, and malnutrition, and medical discovery. So those would be my top 5 for the relationship between oceans and human health.
So just a few little things, really.
Just a few.
You know, just little incidental things that come from the ocean. You know, and I suppose, you know, when you put it like that, it makes this sort of the concept of when we see the trawling in the films, you know, just so distressing, with the indiscriminate loss of life and the way it just sort of like decimates everything and just leaves this sort of trail of destruction and waste behind it. But the other thing that's kind of not very good for our oceans, which is pretty topical at the moment, is the expansion of offshore gas. And, you know, as we know, when they're kind of putting out all these big, terrifying gas fields out there, and they affect local biodiversity and the pollution from that. And of course, you know, the potential for oil spills and gas leaks and things like that. And so just a quick response from all of you, maybe a little opportunity to vent our spleen, but how are we feeling about the approval of the Northwest Shelf extension? You know, Arabella, what do you reckon? How are you feeling about that?
Well, I think politically I feel completely disappointed and a waste of my vote at this point, because I think the tone of the nation is not being read by the Labor government. But I think it's diabolical in terms of the ongoing impact. But there are a number of things that are happening. For those that didn't know, I mean, I know the minister's announced something tonight that he's going to listen to the annual review, but that only happened and could only happen because of the failure of the intersections of the relevant legislation. For us, it's the EPBC Act, Native Title legislation, First Nations rights, and which are wrapped around human rights and the idea about public value, which is the economic piece on that approval as well. So the loophole that we're being told it's for domestic use when it's simply not. It's not even taxed in the right way, in the right measures. So it really is a life-changing decision for the whole of the continent if Labor is to continue with it.
Yeah, they've and the timing of it, of course, is hard not to feel like it's a little bit of a cynical moment in time. What about you, Adele? What's your response?
Well, you know, it's pure politics. You know, once we had the election, Labor quickly ran over to Western Australia, to the resource industry. I wasn't surprised at all. The Australian Marine Conservation Society, are working on Browse Basin and Scott Reef. So if we choke off Browse Basin, there isn't the gas to come in to the Northwest Shelf. Critical natural valuable assets in Scott Reef. So we have been focusing on the marine environment as is our remit, but it's not over. You know, we work to choke off the gas. That's one thing we can do, and it's got its long time frame, but it has those conditions in place. So of course everyone will be watching that every single step of the way and working to pull it up if anything goes awry according to those conditions. So the battle continues, our work continues. We'll work to try and keep the gas in the earth. We'll work to protect important places like Scott's Reef, and all the while, you know, we hope the world gets on with the job of switching away from fossil fuels, the demand is reduced, etc. So we continue onwards, and you know, it is the oil and gas industry is coming from many angles at different places in the country, and everywhere they are, even Darwin Harbour here, there is strong, united campaigns across civil society. And so, and it's growing, it's getting stronger. So, we band together, we have hope, and we have to do what we have to do to shore up a healthy, safe future.
Thank you, Adele. And I suppose that's lovely to get because I think, the people I'm speaking to this week have been very decimated by the news. And, it is one step in it's another battle, basically. And it doesn't mean that we're not continuing to walk forward for the health of our planet and for the rights of nature and for human rights. What about you, Brooke? How does it make you feel? What's your response?
I mean, I guess I don't have too much more to add beyond what Adele and Arabella have already said, other than the fact that I think it's appalling. The Northwest Shelf is already the third highest emitting facility in the country, and those are just the direct emissions. It won't assist in Australia's energy transition. It's nothing but an export project. So I think I feel very disappointed about this decision.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. It is. I think it's, I think many people are pretty gutted about it, and just feels so cynical to me, the timing. Let's go on now to sort of more positive notes. And, we've all already touched on the need for treatment. We can say that the ocean's health is in trouble, that, planetary health is in trouble, and, our oceans are suffering as part of our ongoing exploitation. But, as you kind of just alluded to there, we're not blitzed yet. We're not sending the whole planet off to palliative care quite yet. We've still got to, ways through. And so I'm going to start with you this time, Adele. With the marine protected areas as a key solution to our oceans, how do you think Australia's going to go with that? How are we delivering on our marine protected areas, and what does that mean for with the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty? And maybe if you just kind of explain to everybody a little bit about what that is.
Sure. I'll start with the High Seas Treaty. The high seas are the areas of ocean beyond any country's jurisdiction. So Australia's exclusive economic zone covers the waters around Australia to a certain point, and where we don't butt up against another country's exclusive economic zone, which we don't, because we're the big island out in the middle of nowhere, is the high seas. So there's been too long a history of plundering the high seas, as it's not under any particular country's jurisdiction. And so this High Seas Treaty was formed. It has been signed onto by the Australian government. And the government is on the path to ratifying that, therefore putting it into law in Australia. So that's a great thing. And myself personally, recently, I've been doing some work on looking at a high seas marine protected area on the east coast of Australia, between New Zealand, New Caledonia, that part of the Pacific there. And so working on that and turning that into a marine park, managing it better and looking after the seas there. Within Australia's exclusive economic zone, we have been doing a pretty good job, actually. Of course, we need to do more. We have a network of marine parks all the way around the Australian coastline, but what we need to do is put more of those marine parks and more of our oceans into the fully protected marine sanctuaries, like what David Attenborough talks about, to give our oceans the opportunity to recover. And we have a new government at the moment, so we're looking at, over the next 4 years and hopefully further, those marine parks will be reviewed all the way around Australia, and we'll be looking to improve protection in those areas and to have the country do better, having Australia's Aboriginal people leading in that and working with the government on that, which has been lacking historically, like many things.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to note is, I know there's a question later for Brooke actually about why it is important that doctors are part of it. Like, I'm in an environmental NGO, And it is always so valuable when doctors come on board and use their voices in campaigns. It adds a voice of authority, and it adds a new set of knowledge and skills and input, and people listen to it. You know, the doctors are a trusted voice. So I'm in an ENGO. Yes, we're trusted, but also, you know, we're greenies and whatever, we're campaigners. So we always like to get as many cross-sectoral voices involved. That's where our strength is, when we have many people from different sectoral groups. And the doctors always play a key role, even in my backyard in Darwin, where there's a proposal for a gas hub, gas-fueled industrial hub. And the doctors walk alongside us talking about the health impacts that are expected. You know, people sit up and listen. We have a program in the territory called Keep Top End Coast Healthy, and that is because people as a society, they listen to, they connect with health messaging because they care about it, and they care about it for their families. So I think that doctors have such a valuable role to play in many ways, but certainly in working to improve the health of our environment, our oceans, and get our communities involved and getting them to listen. So, yeah, good on you guys.
Good on you, Adele. You're lovely. Thank you very much. You know, and you know, I mean, I quite agree. I think that as health professionals, you know, we have an opportunity to advocate for a health-based response to planetary problems. I also think we have a responsibility to do it too. You know, that when we graduate, we take this oath, which is, you know, the Declaration of Geneva, and the first line of the oath is, "I consecrate my life to the service of humanity." And, you know, my personal belief is that if we're not doing everything we can to look after our planet's health, then we are breaching our oath, and that, you know, it's our job to be there. I mean, I actually think it's the job of all humans on the planet to look after what we call our home. But yeah, I think we have capacity as well. And so, you know, we should. And I think most of the people on this call would probably agree with that. That's why they're members of DEA. Arabella, could you talk a bit more? And I know you've touched on this a little already tonight, you know, because the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty is about providing, you know, a legal framework in the, you know, the sort of the high seas. And Adele just talked about, we do have some, you know, protected areas in Australian waters, but, you know, the legal angle, there's still some problems there, surely, because otherwise we wouldn't be having all these things.
It doesn't serve First Nations interests at all, so that needs to be made very clear. There is no relationship with First Nations knowledges protection, biosecurity, pharmaceutical sharing, community benefit features of any of that arrangement. So for people to understand it, they need to understand the native title legislation, which just goes as far as the 200 nautical miles off the coast. So that means, and, you know, obviously everyone's excited to get it done because it's been, I think it was like 20 years in the making, this treaty. So it's been a long time of people to even get their head around it internationally. But it does not allow for traditional knowledge and marine decision making. It does not have a role for Aboriginal people anywhere, First Nations people anywhere, to be a part of its framework in any meaningful way, which comes back to the challenges with the EPBCA Act as well, because it's through that legislation that you get the ability to use traditional knowledge systems. You get genuine community benefit making and right to veto, right to say no. That, as we know, or we should all know, is, and that's, you know, the objectives of that are about the national jurisdiction. And then you've got the marine protected areas and the rules around the environmental impact assessments, for example. Yeah. And so that would mean in reality that in those assessment features or impact assessment features, you would want to look at tangible, intangible relationships. You would want to look at First Nations traditional impact. I said what my totem was, but there are many people who share a totem of whales and shark, large scoping animals impacted by turtles up and down the East Coast. So it's, and First Nations people in the Pacific don't consider ourselves of the continent, we're of the ocean.
Yeah.
So the land is not the important part, the waters are.
Yeah.
So the fact that you have this profound global treaty without any concession or consideration about Pacific rights across land in a human rights frame, if you will, means that there are going to be challenges. For us in Australia, it means, again, an amendment to the EPBCA Act so that the very things that are missing from the treaty level come to bear inside the domestic legislation. But at the moment, the EPBCA Act does not allow consent from First Nations people. There's no right to veto. The list goes on. So again, the Samuel Review will tell you what's wrong with First Nations right and including Indigenous knowledges and how they lack having any right to come to fruition under environmental legislation. The Native Title Act has complete limitations in the same way. No right to veto, no right to say no, no right to insist on assessments, which is why you're seeing Section 10 under the Aboriginal Heritage and Cultural Heritage Act. So if the treaty was in existence and in operation, you were relying on the domestic legislation to bring about the very things that we spoke about in question 1 and question 2, which is spiritual value, some sort of health value, science and bioscience value, biotech value or ecological value, all of those pharmaceutical benefits, which may or may not yield and go to market to give us drugs or to give us protection in some way, have no Indigenous components around that. So there's nothing to say that it needs to be benefit sharing, which is really important. And a lot of that work you see up in the Great Barrier Reef is about trying to get benefit sharing, both economic benefit sharing, but benefit sharing in terms of rest and recovery for areas of significance and benefit sharing for renewal. All of those laws and obligations and the way that that behaviour dances upon itself comes from the treaties either having or insisting First Nations participation. Otherwise, you have to rely on the good graces of a government of the day. So, so two things I would say, because we're getting into the conversation. One is that life is inevitable. We may kill ourselves, but the planet will survive. It will reorder itself.
Yeah.
That's an Aboriginal philosophical position. The other is that we need to work more together to push on, like the EPBC Act, insisting on First Nations right with an awareness that it doesn't exist on international law sphere, because Australia has yet to adopt the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples.
Yeah.
So the more that we can, as climate groups and people who care about the people part in the environment, understand and demystify what needs pressuring or what needs support, we will actually get better results for everybody. So that's probably the last part that I want to say. But if you are, and I'm always happy to see First Nations people out the front protecting land, and it looks like we're always rubbing up against the machine. But the truth is there's no integration of First Nations or human rights in most of our environmental pieces of legislation. So it ends up being a First Nations person that is the face of that destruction, but not the only victim of that destruction.
Yeah, that's quite a true thing to say. And, you know, I suppose, this is, like you talk about systems issues and, systems approaches to knowledge, which is all about, the interconnection of all the different parts. And, we somehow can't, some people can't conceptualize that. I feel like some people can't kind of grasp that whole big whole, all the stuff, all the interconnection. And that's a shame, because, that's the actual truth of it, is that it is all big and complex and interconnected. And if you, omit, First Nations knowledge, if you're not, and recognition of rights and, human rights, really, then
nature has its own rights. So the thing is that if we just start thinking more solidly about our human rights are just preserving the natural environment's rights, nature's rights.
Absolutely.
Right for the environment to be as it is.
Yeah, exactly.
To continue to flourish.
And the right for all living things, you know,
Right
the
for all
rights
living
to
things.
all
That's
of
right.
us. Exactly. Everything, every plant, every animal, all the fungus, all the little creatures, all the little things.
All have rights, as important as we are.
Absolutely. Completely agree. So lastly for you, Brooke, you know, and Adele's also already touched on this is, you know, back to us as doctors, you know, why should we advocate? Like, how does, you know, the advocacy for ocean health, how is that an extension of our duty of care as healthcare practitioners?
Well, as I hope I've highlighted tonight in my kind of earlier response, ocean health is a key part of planetary health and human health are inextricably linked. So, you know, what a lot of people don't understand, especially politicians, unfortunately, is that the ecosystems on our planet, and Arabella was obviously just talking about this, but the ecosystems on our planet exist in a very delicate balance. You remove one crucial card from the house, everything collapses. And this is what One Health is. One Health as a concept. It's the fundamental interconnectedness, really, of human beings and plants and animals and the ecosystems in which all of us exist. So, you know, it's important that doctors play a key role in ocean advocacy because, you know, ocean health is human health. It's public health, it's preventative health, and, you know, for that reason, I think it's simply an extension of our duty of care as medical professionals. And again, and I'm just going to make another point, which again, Arabella has kind of already mentioned herself tonight, is that advocating for oceans is also important for health equity. So anyone who has seen David Attenborough's documentary that we've referenced 100 times tonight, and if you haven't watched it, you obviously need to go out and watch it straight away. But David Attenborough referred to this as colonialism at sea, and I think that's a really perfect way of describing it. It's the people who can least afford to be the victims of these effects are the ones who are the most affected. And in particular, you know, this includes on a national level, this includes our coastal Aboriginal communities, obviously our beautiful Torres Strait Islander communities, and so many island nations across the Pacific. And my final point, and this is one that Adele talked about earlier, is that I do think that having medical voices adds scientific weight and credibility to the conversation. So I think it's illogical for doctors not to be advocating for ocean health when you think about it.
Absolutely. It'd be like an omission, be like ignoring chest pain or something, you know.
Exactly.
It's so absolutely there. And, you know, we talk about, you know, there's, you know, whether COP31 will be a, you know, Australia Pacific COP, and, you know, what's that gonna look like? And if we're ignoring ocean health and ignoring Pacifica health at that COP, then that's a pretty bad thing. I do have some quick actions, therefore, as part of, you know, things that doctors can do, or anyone on the call, because you don't necessarily have to be a doctor to come to one of our webinars. I hope there's other people here as well. Firstly, I've shared a petition in the chat. That's the Australian Marine Conservation's David Attenborough Ocean petition. If people want to sign that, that would be helpful. It's just started a new form for an open letter asking to Prime Minister Albanese and Minister Watt to urgently introduce a bill to ratify the Oceans Treaty. There's one signature on that right now, it's mine. So if other people want to sign that, that'd be really helpful. And also I'll put Murray Watt's phone number in there so that if anyone wants to like give Murray a call and say, how you going? You know, like I really think you should, you know, maybe do some of these good things that we elected you to do. If people have rung, you know, usually ringing politicians is actually a pretty easy 5 minutes of your life. And often you speak to a staffer, but they do record the calls that you make, and it's a way of having a bigger impact than you can alone. So that's my timer. I think that's the end. We have sort of rung right up to the time. I was hoping for some questions from the floor. I might have room for one quick question. If anybody's got a burning issue that they want to share, you can show your face or come off mute or put your hand up or anything like that. That would be lovely. You don't have. Here's John Isa. Hi, John.
Oh, hello, Kate. Kate, I just have one question to ask about a topic which hasn't really been mentioned, and that is sea level rise. Now,
Yeah.
I notice at our local beach, I've been going there for 65 years, and it's really a cause of nostalgia for me because the soft sand, the coastline has disappeared. There's erosion of dunes and no area for relaxation and recreation. And this is an important concept in the Australian beach scene. So I do notice this against the level, against fixed structures. So that's a real, I see it as real change, but no one talks about it. No one even appreciates it. I just wonder if someone could comment on what observations they've made of the sea level rise around Australia's coast and its implications, please.
Anyone?
I mean, I will have a go. I guess perhaps it feels like you're not hearing about it because there's so many big issues going on with climate change impacts. You know, the reefs are bleaching, mangroves have died, the West Coast got a heat wave, and there's an algal bloom. But it's certainly there 100%. I mean, in the north, sea level rise is huge. It's inundating wetlands, which is having huge ecological and cultural impact on First Nations peoples. I mean, and often it gets talked about in terms of threat to property. Whatever it takes, I think sometimes, like if the people down in Byron Bay are concerned about sea level rise because their big houses are going to go into the ocean, but as long as it gets on the agenda, I don't mind who's doing it. But I think it just gets mixed up in the many climate change impact issues that are occurring, but it is serious. And I mean, some habitats can adapt faster. For example, mangroves are pretty good at moving inland as long as you don't develop up to the back of the mangroves, for example. But it's there, and it is having a significant impact, like that example I mentioned in the north where wetlands are being inundated. And it's worth noting there's cumulative impacts in those wetlands. They have pest animals such as buffalo and pigs. So the buffalo and pigs and their hooves are damaging the wetlands. We have the saltwater intrusion damaging the wetlands. So it is a concern, and new solution that's coming on board as an example is blue carbon. So that environment, that area we're talking about, that zone, is really great for carbon sink. So, for example, they're looking at carbon offsets, funding the eradication of those pest animals in Northern Australia. So there can be fee for service, carbon money coming in for Aboriginal ranger groups to get out on the ground and get rid of those hooved animals, and they get paid to do that, and it helps the environment. So we do have solutions and innovative things coming down the line. It's just a question of, can we get onto it quick enough? Because it is a serious issue. Sea level rise is a serious issue.
Absolutely, yeah. And Arabella, do you want to
add to that? Yeah, I think you're saying really it's about crisis fatigue. There's so much going on, it's hard to break through. But I do think if you've been going to the same beach for 65 years, you need to start documenting all of the stuff that you see more readily, because my view is that everybody needs to be the ranger and more active in both the monitoring of climate impact, what we're seeing. And the reason I say that you do that, because at some point, in some way, whether it's through wetlands or another flood or a cyclone, someone will come around from the government and go, well, what have you observed over the last 10 years? Be the warrior of observation, which is what we need everyone to be doing. We need all Australians to be spending 2 or 3 hours a day, everywhere in every place, tending to the environment. And if that's just in observation, that's extremely powerful, because I can tell you that any scientist that comes along and meets you and you've got 5 years of good photographs from the beach of erosion will absolutely love you. Will go, you are a winner. And so I want to encourage everyone on the call to be the warrior and be your David Attenborough where you are. Otherwise, it will feel like crisis fatigue and no one's hearing your voice. But what I've learned in our massive floods, our cyclones and everything else is that my job is to empower every one of my neighbours into being a steward and a serious activist in a really deliberate way, because the government will not save us. It will be our local neighbourhoods and our regional communities that will save each other.
Completely agree. That's
Can
beautiful.
I just add
That's a great thing. And Brooke, do you want to add something, Brooke?
Oh, just one second, sorry, because I know we've hit the time. Obviously, yeah, 110% about Arabella's points about citizen science. It's so important. There's so many wonderful citizen science apps out there as well, about a range of areas, from frogs to kind of birds to everything else. But I once, a few years ago, I remember reading an article about, it was an Australian Indigenous elder, but I actually can't remember her name. And the article was about environmental conservation. And this elder specifically suggested that all Australians, whether Indigenous or not, should adopt a totem. That the concept of a totem doesn't is not exclusive, doesn't have to be exclusive to Indigenous people. And she said, let's just say your totem is the Gouldian finch, very beautiful bird found in Northern Australia. Then the rest of your life can be devoted to trying to protect that particular creature. So perhaps your totem, if you love the ocean, might be the dugong or one of our various endangered turtles, because we have 6 kinds of turtles in Australia, and 3 are endangered and 3 are vulnerable. So, or a particular whale or a particular fish or whatever it might be. So I think that's I thought that was a really beautiful idea, and it's stuck with me ever since. And I like telling people about it.
Good on you, Brooke. That's lovely. And, I suppose it's the point is that what we're all really hearing here is that each of us have a responsibility or an opportunity to, make a positive contribution, and we see these big global problems, and they are big and global, and it can be very hard as one little human to go, what difference can I make? But of course we can make a difference, because, we help create the reality that we live in. And so everything that we do has an effect. And so let's try and do good things. And of course, with sea level rise, the whole of Pacifica, they're all being affected by that now massively, with healthcare, with their health and loss of country, and the infectious diseases up there. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you to everyone who came along tonight to listen to our webinar. Thank you so much, Arabella. Thank you so much, Adele. Thank you so much, Brooke, for sharing your time and heart and expertise with us here this evening. And I think we'll end there. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Kate. Legend.